it gets plowed back into their research mission and their safety promotion mission. And I think for that reason, anyone who doesn't support Dan is bonkers. If you're a diver and you're traveling, you should have dive travel insurance, definitely.
Oh,
And Dan does a very good job of that. And the money they make from that gets plowed back into the safety/research mission, which I think is fabulous. And they're one of the few organizations in the world that does that and has money for research, which is why diving medicine is not, it doesn't advance as quickly as other areas of medicine, because finding money to do research is really hard. I mean, we've been lucky over the last 10 years. We've been strongly supported by the US Navy for our research program. And straight up, I am deeply grateful for that. There are a few philanthropists around who are diving passionate and who fund diving research, and Inkfish is a really good example of that. And we're very lucky to have those people. Again, deeply grateful, but it is hard. And so supporting an organization like Dan that does plow money back into research is a really good thing to do.
I'm actually shocked, since I started diving again last year, on how many people do not get dive insurance at all. And they're like, I only dive once or twice a year. I'm not going to get banked.
Yeah, well, what surprises me about all that is how cheap the insurance actually is compared to the risk you take if you don't have it. I mean, Dan insurance, it's not like insuring your income, or, some insurance is expensive, but you try insuring a pet or a dog or something, I mean, that costs big money. But Dan insurance for diving actually is relatively cheap. And that probably reflects the fact that the risk is relatively small. But if it happens to you and you're in the wrong place, it can be financially devastating. So,
Yeah, in
I
bankrupt.
mean, I don't want to come across as an insurance salesman, because I'm not. But as a diving physician who handles international calls from various places, we get a lot of we get some patients from the Pacific. I've seen disasters, and I don't ever want that to be me from a financial perspective. So, strongly recommended.
So, like, just to give some people an example, what can a evacuation and a chamber run cost if they're coming to your facility and they're not insured under your
Yeah.
program?
If you come to us, we're actually pretty reasonable. I'll be honest, I don't even know what we charge for a chamber run here. But what I can tell you is that the evacuations, if you need a 1 atmosphere pressurized air ambulance, like a Learjet kind of thing, you can be talking 50, 100,000, to get you from a remote Pacific location to us could cost a lot of money. I did see some data just recently about other chambers in other parts of the world, where a typical US Navy treatment table 6 was being charged out at something like 5 to 6,000 US dollars. We wouldn't charge anything like that, but that's just for the chamber treatment. If you're paralyzed and you end up in a hospital needing an MRI scan or a CT scan and intensive care, I mean, the chamber treatments are the least of your worries. The rest of the cost will just balloon out. So, yeah, and that's the thing that would really worry you, is getting very sick in a remote place and having to be evacuated, and then hospital care. It could be very, very expensive. The chamber treatments themselves, maybe not so much, but the whole package, very expensive.
Yeah, I've heard nightmares of that. In fact, when I did a Blackbeard's trip in April, And when I was in the Bahamas, and the lady who's organizing the trip, friend of mine, she warned everybody in the group. She says, "Stay within your limits. Don't mess up." Because apparently there was a lady on the trip before that she had been on, and she had been going way over her table limits and her certification level, and she got bent. They had to fly her out to Miami, and apparently it was like $100,000 or
Yeah.
something like that by the time they were done, which is just insane.
Mm. Yeah, well,
So
and in the United States, of course, the costs of medical treatment are very high, beyond our comprehension here. So, oh no, look, we're just circling back to the same point. If you're going to dive, get down insurance. Pretty simple.
so, um, what do you also? I mean, I've noticed a lot. I've been using nitrox since pretty well exclusively since I've started diving again. Um, do you think that nitrox should be used by everybody?
Well, I think it would be good if it was used by everybody. I think there's a extra layer of training that's required to safely use higher oxygen fractions in the water. So with the caveat that you need the appropriate training, which isn't hard. Like lots of people do it now. Nitrox is incredibly common. You go on some dive trips or to various dive resorts, and everybody's diving nitrox. So yes, philosophically, I think it's a good idea. Even better if people use it to derive an increased level of safety rather than an increased period of time at depth. As you well know, and I'm sure all of your listeners know, that you can use nitrox in two ways. You can use nitrox and tell your computer you're diving air, so you get increased safety. I think that's a good thing. Or you can use the nitrox to give yourself more time, or a blend of the two. But I think that using nitrox for its safety characteristics is a good idea. Yeah, of course. Uh, just bearing in mind that
Not
higher oxygen fractions, you can't go as deep. You have to keep an eye on that. Don't want to have a seizure underwater. So having the right training is important. Yeah.
Now, is there any type? I've never actually asked this to a hyperbaric physician before. Is there any underlying conditions that would cause you to where you shouldn't use nitrox because of the higher partial pressure of oxygen?
Mm. Well, yes, there is. Although most of them, many diving physicians would consider would be a contraindication to any form of diving, whether you're using air or nitrox. But uh, for example, we have occasionally countenance diving by people, for example, who had a head injury and a seizure at the time, and then they have a period of years where everything's okay, so it all looks like it's settled down, but you can never be 100% sure that that risk of having a seizure has completely gone away. And you basically don't want to do anything to provoke it more than you need to. So we know that high oxygen partial pressures can provoke seizures. So you might say to someone like that, look, um, okay, return to diving. Probably best not to use high PO2s. Keep that relatively low, and you might impose a depth limit and say just use air because that will keep you away from that seizure danger zone. The same would be true, for example, with someone who's been epileptic but has grown out of it, maybe been 5 years seizure free. It's quite controversial whether those people should dive, but if one were to dive, you might give them the same kind of advice. Best to avoid nitrox, best to avoid high PO2s, don't want to have a seizure underwater. So, and there's also one cancer therapy drug which does seem to sensitize the lungs to high pressures of oxygen later in life, even for some years. It's again controversial, but if someone who'd had that drug was going to dive, you might say to them, maybe best not to have nitrox, just air to a certain depth would be acceptable. So those are a few examples of where you might prescribe against using nitrox. Yeah.
So you were talking about epileptics. Do you think that after you've had epileptic seizures, you should be done diving, period, or depends on the case?
I think it's a case by case basis thing, Kurt. I mean, I'm actually quite liberal when it comes to fitness for diving issues, almost to the point of being considered heretic by my conservative colleagues. But there are some things where I do draw the line. Again, we talk about continuum of risk. We mentioned that before, but like so, at one end of that spectrum, if you've got someone who's a brittle epileptic, there's no way they should be diving. Like, absolutely not. At the other end of the spectrum, you might have someone who had a febrile seizure as a child or had a seizure disorder that seemed to last a short time. People do grow out of them and they've been seizure free for a decade, no drugs, no nothing. I would be reasonably happy to counsel someone about the theoretical concern, with oxygen and higher pressures and being underwater. And if they were happy to accept that risk as an informed risk acceptor, then I'd be reasonably happy for them to dive. The key thing is my duty in that setting is to make sure they understand the potential risk that they're accepting. And if people want to accept that risk, that's fine. I think smart people should be able to make informed choices. And then somewhere along that continuum of risk, you'll reach a point where you think, no, I'm just not happy. Even if they say, I don't care about the risk, I'm not happy. And I've seen this. I've had implied a brittle asthmatic epileptic who can't clear their ears come in and say, I don't give a damn about any of that. I just want to dive. And it doesn't matter how motivated they are and how risk accepting they are. I wouldn't sign off on that because it's just overtly too dangerous. So I mean, it one of the things that we do as diving physician is risk assessment and then counseling people about their risk and allowing them to make informed choices. And that's a pretty common approach these days, particularly to recreational diving assessments. Occupational diving is trickier because there are often rules around that, like set standards, and you just have to stick to those. But with recreational diving, uh, there's more scope for informed risk acceptance. So we often do go down that pathway.
Cool.